the focus of this book is on areas of research which have been either completely or largely neglected because they simply don't fit in to the present view of the world. And because they've been so neglected by orthodox institutional science, there are quite simple experiments to open up these fields that could be done, in many cases for budgets of less than £10. And as soon as one realizes that important research can be cheap, then the terrible Stalinist restrictions that institutional science has, you can't do it unless you've got approval, peer reviews, grants, committees, and so on. Terrible stranglehold of orthodoxy. But if you can do things cheaply, you're completely free, because the only control they have is through money, giving out funds. And if you don't need the funds, you can do what you like. And science in the past grew out of a fertile field of amateur research. Even as eminent a scientist as Charles Darwin never had a government grant or an academic post. He lived as a private man, a gentleman, in his own house, and did most of his research in the garden with his son Francis. Well, he also kept pigeons. Now, homing pigeons are kept by 200,000 people in Britain. It's largely a working class sport. It doesn't cost much, but it does cost more than £10. This experiment would cost about £350, the one I'm going to talk about. But this is one of the experiments in the book. It's the one with which the book opens, or almost opens. And the reason I wanted to talk about it today is because I haven't yet discussed this with Ralph and Terence. And the present state of play, which I'm going to summarize now, it shows science. There have been investigations of homing pigeons. It's one of the few areas where research has been done. And it's led to the conclusion that we really do not know. We haven't a clue how they do it. And in this state of the utterly unknown, I don't know how they do it either. So I was hoping that by talking about it with Ralph and Terence, it might become clearer, or possibly even more obscure. At any rate, it's something that I really want to discuss with them, and this is the opportunity to do it, and I hope you will all find this of interest too, because the situation we're in is one of an acknowledged fact. Pigeons can home from huge distances. You can take a pigeon, a homing pigeon, 700 miles from its loft and release it, and it'll be home that evening, if it's a fast-flying bird. Pigeon racing enthusiasts do this regularly. Every Saturday, today for example, in the spring and the summer, people are racing pigeons. Sometimes pigeon racing clubs have them released in northern Spain. Sometimes they take them to the north of Scotland. Sometimes they're released in other parts of the continent. And they're taken away, they're taken in baskets on trains or on lorries. They're released, the baskets are opened, the pigeons circle around and they fly straight home. And then the people whose pigeons come back fastest, they have a little time clock, and there's a thing on the leg of the pigeon they stamp. And then they calculate the exact distance to that owner's loft and work out the speed. The ones that come first win the prize. It's a very competitive sport. They win cups, there are cash prizes. Good racing birds can sell for as much as £5,000 for breeding. Ordinary ones cost about £5. Anyway, here's a phenomenon. Everyone agrees they can do it. And moreover, it's part of a much wider phenomenon. Dogs and cats can home if you live a long way away from home. Even cows can home. Thousands of other species of birds and animals can home. It's very widespread. It's just that pigeons are the best known example. Now, how do they do it? Well, Charles Darwin was one of the first to put forward a theory. He said, well, maybe they do it by remembering all the twists and turns of the outward journey. This theory was tested, and to test it, people anaesthetized pigeons, put them in rotating drums, and drove them in vans, sealed, closed vans, by very devious routes to the point of release. And when the pigeons came round from the anaesthetic and overcame the ill effects of this treatment on the way out, when they were released, they circled around and flew straight home. So nobody any longer believes that's possible. They can't remember the twists and turns of the outward journey. This experiment's been done many times, sometimes with slow rotating drums, sometimes with drums rotating so fast that the poor birds are sort of centrifuged against the edges of the drum. And despite these appalling maltreatments, the pigeons go straight home. So that's theory number one. That's not how they do it. Second theory, that they do it by smell, that they sniff the air and sniff their home. This, of course, smell is usually what people propose when animals show uncanny powers that can't be explained. They usually say, well, it must be an extraordinarily good sense of smell. Well, this has been tested too. First of all, it's not very plausible. If you release a bird in Spain and it flies to England, and the home is downwind from the point where you release it rather than upwind. In other words, it's flying with the wind. There's no way smells could blow from its loft in England to Spain against the wind. So this theory is inherently implausible. Nevertheless, because everything else has failed, it's believed in passionately by some researchers in the field, particularly the Italians. Anyway, this has been tested too. People have blocked up their nostrils with sealing wax. They still get home. They've severed their olfactory nerves, poor birds. They still get home. They've anaesthetized their nasal mucosa with xylocaine or other local anesthetics, and they still set off straight away in the homeward direction and get home. So it's not smell. Next theory, they do it by the sun, somehow calculating the latitude and longitude from the sun's position. Well, pigeons can home on cloudy days, and they can also be trained to home at night, so they don't need to see the sun or even the stars. But if they can see the sun, then they use the sun as a kind of rough compass, more or less as we would if you want to keep your bearings, keep the sun on your right, that kind of thing. And if you shift their time sense by raising them so they're shifted by six hours, they think it's 6 hours early, you switch on lights early in the morning, you cover their cage or loft later at 6 hours earlier than sunset, you can make them think the time's been shifted by 6 hours. When you release them on a sunny day, they set off 90 degrees in the wrong direction. So they use the sun as a compass, but after a mile or two they realise they're going the wrong way. They change course and go home. Landmarks are inherently unfeasible because if you release the birds hundreds of miles from anywhere they've been before, landmarks couldn't possibly explain it. Although they undoubtedly use landmarks on their way when they're close to their home, just the final bit. Anyway, this theory also has been tested to destruction, and this was tested by equipping the pigeons with frosted glass contact lenses, which meant they couldn't see anything at all, or only the vaguest blur of shapes when they were very close. And pigeons with frosted glass contact lenses can't fly very normally. They take off and the whole bird points upwards. They're not under ideal conditions for flying. But nevertheless, such birds can be released up to 100 miles away or more. And some of them get picked off by sparrowhawks who immediately see that they're flying in a peculiar way. But others can get within 200 or 300 yards of the loft. They crash into trees or telegraph posts, or flop down on the ground within 100 yards of the loft in some cases. They need to see for the last 100 yards. But it's incredible that they can actually get so close. Sometimes they overfly the loft and then within a mile or two realise they've gone too far and turn around and come back. So it's not landmarks. And that leaves only magnetism. And this again is something, until the 70s, most scientists were very reluctant to consider because previously magnetism as an animal sense has been associated with animal magnetism, mesmerism, and a whole range of fringe subjects they didn't want to mess with. Plus the fact it seems so unlikely that pigeons could detect a field as weak as the Earth's magnetic field. Well, it's been shown that some migratory birds can detect the Earth's magnetic field. They can tell where north and south are from the magnetic field. They do seem to have a kind of inherent compass. But magnetism can't explain how they get home, because even if they could measure the dip of the compass, i.e. the angle towards it dips down, at the North Pole it points straight down, at the equator it's parallel. If they could measure the dip, they could tell how far north or south they'd been taken. But if you took pigeons due east or west, the dip would be exactly the same as at home. And it wouldn't give them any information on whether they were east, west or west. And pigeons can home equally well from all compass points. So even in principle, the magnet won't explain it. They do seem to have a kind of vague magnetic compass sense. But this wouldn't explain homing. If you had a magnetic compass in your pocket and you were parachuted into a strange place and said, all right, get home, here's a compass, you wouldn't be able to do it, because you'd know where north and south were, but you wouldn't know where home was. A compass alone can't get you home. Anyway, to disrupt the magnetic sense, pigeons have been treated experimentally in two ways. Firstly, they've had magnets strapped to them, which would, as they flap their wings, these moving magnets would totally overwhelm the magnetic sense. And secondly, they've been degaussed by being put in extremely strong magnetic fields that would demagnetize any magnetically sensitive parts within them. Well, these demagnetized pigeons and pigeons with magnets strapped to them to confuse their magnetic sense, or with magnetic coils over their heads, still get home perfectly all right. Well, that's the current state of play. Every hypothesis has been tested to destruction. They've all failed. And the remaining ones, there's one, the only one that you occasionally hear is, well, maybe they hear their home from hundreds of miles away because of extremely sensitive hearing. Even that one won't work, because pigeons that can't hear can still get home. So everything has been tried. Everything within the last 10 years has finally, the most rigorous tests have been done in the last 10 years. All these theories have failed. Nobody has a clue how they do it. And pigeon homing is the tip of the iceberg of a vast range of unexplained biological phenomena, which include the migration of swallows, how they come back to Hazelwood every year, having flown to southern Africa in the winter, the migration of cuckoos, the migration of salmon, of eels, and so on. These are usually explained in terms of smell, as the fish runs, but which only works really within a few miles of the home river. It doesn't explain how they can get thousands of miles through the oceans to the right place. So there's a huge number of phenomena to do with migratory and homing senses in animals which are unexplained. And human beings probably have similar powers too, not very well developed in modern urban people, although even some urban people have quite a good sense of direction, but extremely well developed in nomadic people like Australian Aborigines, South African Bushmen, and also the Polynesian navigators. Now, they probably use ordinary senses as well, but this is a whole range of unsolved problems which is hardly touched by science, which leads to the idea that animals, and probably we too, may have senses and powers undreamt of within existing science. So that's the present state of play, and the experiment that I'm proposing is very simple. I can outline it briefly. I think that the evidence suggests there must be some unknown sense, force or power connecting the pigeons to their home. Now what it is I don't know. My image of it is of a kind of invisible elastic band, taken away and stretched, and they tend to be pulled back. It gives them a kind of directional sense. I'm not bothering at the moment about the possible physical basis of this, whether it's part of existing physics, whether it's an extension of non-locality in quantum physics, whether it requires a new field. That question is open. But with this simple model of an invisible connection, the experiment I'm proposing is the converse of those done so far. If the pigeon's connected to its home, then the usual experiments involve taking the pigeon from the home and it comes back. My experiment involves taking the home from the pigeons. This involves the use of a mobile pigeon loft, which is essentially a simple pigeon shed mounted on a farm trailer on wheels that can be moved around. And I've actually done this experiment, first in Ireland and secondly in Suffolk. So far I haven't been able to carry it past the first phase, the training phase. I found, however, it's possible to train pigeons to home to a mobile loft. They don't expect their home to move any more than we do. And the first time you take them out of it, you move their home just 100 yards the first time. And when you release them, they can see perfectly well that it's not where it was before. But they go on flying round the place where it was before. It takes them hours before they'll go into the loft in its new position. That's how we'd behave if we went home after being here at Hazelwood and found our home 100 yards down the street. Most of us wouldn't just go straight in and settle down to it in our letters and so on. We'd probably go round and round in circles around the place where it was before and look awfully puzzled. Well, that's what pigeons do. But if you keep doing this, after 3 or 4 times, they just get used to it. They realise they're sort of nomads or gypsies now. And they'll go straight in. They'll find the home up to 2 or 3 miles away within 10 minutes and go straight in. You can do this. And in the First World War, the Belgian, German and British military pigeon corps had mobile lofts. The British had 200 mobile lofts and converted London buses by the end of the First World War. And there is still a mobile pigeon loft research project going on in Europe. The Swiss Army is the last army in Europe to have homing pigeons. And the head of the officer commanding pigeons, Dr. Hans-Peter Lipp, I'm now in correspondence with. He's at the University of Zurich. And he's carrying out a fascinating research program on military uses of mobile lofts in Switzerland at the moment. He and I are exchanging notes on the subject. It's the only other research project going on of this kind. His objectives are quite different, though. They're to find ways of carrying messages more effectively. Anyway, the key experiment is you move the mobile loft 50 miles, let's say, after you've trained the bird, and see if they can find it. If you move it downwind from the point of release, so they couldn't smell it, and if the pigeons can find it quite quickly, fly straight there, then this would suggest there's an invisible connection between them and their home. The next question is it between the loft itself for them and the loft itself or the other pigeons? You leave some of their nearest and dearest in the loft. And you can do that further experiments then by taking the nearest and dearest somewhere else and seeing whether they find the nearest and dearest or whether they find the physical structure of the loft. Anyway, this research is relatively cheap. I mean, £500 would cover the entire project. It's well within the capacity of the 5 million pigeon fanciers worldwide who keep pigeons and are well experienced in dealing with them. How the experiment will turn out, I don't know. But here is a profound mystery, the tip of the iceberg of a whole series of biological mysteries which have been more or less neglected. And if there is a new power, force or sense involved, what might it imply, what might it tell us? And where would we go from there? And that's the question I wanted to raise with Ralph and Terence.
Well, thanks for the question. Maybe I could ask you for just a couple of little details first. When they race the pigeons, and then the winner is the pigeon returning to the home loft first.
Yes.
But these home lofts are all in different cities, different streets,
yes,
and so on. So how does it work? The wife of the pigeon racer is at home, and when the mate comes, then pulls out the cellular telephone and calls headquarters.
No, the racing pigeon has a little thing on its leg, a ring, for the race, with its number and the race number. They all have those when they're released. When it gets into the loft, it actually enters the loft. The pigeon fancier is waiting there. He captures the bird, takes this ring off its leg. He has a sealed time clock issued by the local Racing Pigeon Federation. He stamps this thing with the time it's come home. And then they all send in these tags with the time that's stamped by these sealed clocks. And they then calculate from the point of release, say it's Wick in Scotland, they then calculate the distance, straight line distance to each of these houses, divide the distance by the time, and they get the average speed.
So there's no account for difficulties and anomalous obstacles encountered along the way,
no,
like
but
sparrowhawks.
No. Well, if they're killed by a sparrowhawk, they don't win the race.
One more question about the nearest and dearest. Now, the home loft that they're racing to, which is still at home,
yes,
that has family members in it, or
yes.
not? There's a whole bunch of pigeons in the loft, and only one of them or two of them are racing.
There's several racing systems used. They have to have a motive to get home. If you race them in the winter, they don't home very well. But if you race them, they usually race them in the spring and summer, either when they've got eggs and young, so they have an incentive to get back to their family. Or there's another system called the jealousy system, widely practiced, where pigeons are monogamous. They form pairs, at least for the year. And it's a kind of limited monogamy, but at least for that year. So they wait until they've paired up. Then they show, if say they're racing the cockbird, they then hold the cockbird and put another cockbird with its mate, so that the two start billing.
Disgusting.
And then they take it in its basket to the north of Scotland and release it, and it gets home real fast.
Its competitive spirit will stop at nothing. And does the pigeon home to an empty loft? I mean, it requires it to be populated with nearest and dearest. I'm thinking of Bell's theorem.
I don't know. No pigeon racer would normally home to an empty loft. I've homed.
What about Dr. Hans-Peter Lipp of the Swiss Army?
Yes, he's done it to an empty loft, and I've done it to an empty loft, but not over long distances.
Well, yes.
To empty lofts? I don't know. I've only done it over short distances. But probably they could home. But the thing is, they're not very certainly the practical experience. Pigeon racers have been doing this for 100 years. It's been a competitive sport. They've found by long experience that the way to win races is to have this easy to understand personal motivation, as it were.
The stronger the motivation, the tighter the elastic band.
Yes.
Now I'm getting the elastic band theory down. Well, all right, I'm ready to risk an answer to the question. Terence is getting ready to bite. So first of all, I think we could wish for a homing pigeon or monarch butterfly or something that spoke. Then we could ask them the question you're posing, and they'd answer. But actually, I wouldn't trust the answer, because this homing pigeon might also have a theory that, like mine, is much too elaborate and unnecessary, when actually there's some simpler explanation, but they don't know it. For example, the Polynesian navigators, if you ask them how they do it. In fact, there was an English navigator who went to the South Pacific and apprenticed himself to a native navigator. You know, they go over 100 miles to the nearest island and get it dead on without compass and on cloudy days and so on. So they have a theory, but I don't believe it. So we'll just have to make up our own. So this is my fantasy. That well, first of all, I'm accepting the premise that the ordinary fields don't do. So it's a kind of an ESP, and then we want to learn from doing experiments like you propose on the phenomenon to get an idea what it is or how it works. And so this is just a fantasy about that. Yes. Well, I don't know. I'll try talking a little louder and see if that helps. So I'm thinking of bats now, which have been studied in a room just like this one with wires just like that. And in the daytime, of course, the bat will fly around missing the wires and not flying into the wall using vision, primarily, we suppose. And then at night, they do the same thing without vision because of sonar. So in this case, there is another field explanation, and it's well established that it's sonar. So I suppose, based on bats, that the brain and the mind are able to image the results of sonar experiments in a kind of image which is the same kind of image that the eyes form. In other words, that instead of hearing, oh, there's a sound over there, and trying to compute that's an echo and so on, that the bat sees the room with its ears in exactly the same representation, a three-dimensional visual representation that's dynamic, that it can fly through its own sonar receptions, and that the representations are the same. Then if somebody suddenly turned the lights on, the bat would not hesitate and fall to the ground because it has to switch from system A to system B, that the visual representation of the room would exactly overlay precisely the same image as the sonar image of the room. Similarly, dolphins, they have this melon, it's called, a huge sensory organ, and receives sonar waves, and they form visual type. This is just a speculation. And both in the case of bats and dolphins, the visual representation is three-dimensional more than ours, which gives them, in a way, a kind of a higher IQ. Then that's a way of seeing. In other words, for bats and dolphins, in the case of dolphins and whales, they can see almost the entire planet as a three-dimensional object with its curvature and so on. So if there were a sixth sense that homing pigeons and monarch butterflies have, and maybe we do too to a degree, then I would suppose that it works like that. So after the pigeon is rotated, doped, transported 4,000 miles and released, then with its sixth sense is seeing a very detailed three-dimensional road map of the entire planet, essentially, which is there in this field somehow, just as we consult the road map. First of all, it has to orient the road map, the holographic three-dimensional image of its world, with the visual world when it looks. It has to like sort of rotate things around and get them aligned, and after that first step, it can then fly in the map. And then things like smells, which are smells, the sun, the magnetic field, these things are factors, and they would be kind of labeled on the map by the road association. And so this still doesn't explain how to get home, though, because you have to know where home is marked. Like how many times have you parked your car in the three-level structure and then you come out of the department store after too much shopping, you can't remember where the car is. But you know the map of the three-dimensional garage. It has 3 floors, they're square, they're labeled, there's north, south, east, and west, and you can navigate anywhere to a known position in the garage. However, the position of your own home is unknown. Therefore, you don't know how to find the car. So, given the sixth sense with a complete road map of the world as a three-dimensional object containing smells, containing trees, containing magnetic fields, containing the sun and the motion of the zodiac and the celestial, the polar constellations and so on, there must be some kind of beacon where the home is supposed to be. So even in the sixth sense theory, that's still a mystery. Now we've got to the point where you could speak to the pigeon and ask, how is home represented on this map? And the pull of a rubber band is one idea, but I have a feeling that if there is an obstacle, a serious obstacle between the pigeon and the loft, then it will find a way around. It does. See, so it's better to have a map than a rubber band. I think the rubber band theory is too simple. Also, the rubber band, well, considering jealousy and so on, I don't know, but the rubber band, the longer it's pulled, the tighter it is. And that's the opposite of most fields that we know, where the farther you get away from home, the weaker is the pull. So I would think that it more or less appears as a beacon, that part of this field. And the question would be, how is the physical information of a location, especially a recently moved location, inserted into the field? That would be sort of a final mystery in this picture.
What do I think? Well, not that. It seems to me if I can download this into language, that the problem is not with the pigeon, the problem is with the experimenter, that we know from studying quantum mechanics that things are not simply located in space and time. This is what Whitehead called the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. And it seems, I've always felt that what biology is a strategy, a chemical strategy for amplifying quantum mechanical indeterminacy into macrophysical systems called living organisms, and that living organisms somehow work their magic by opening a doorway to the quantum realm through which indeterminacy can come. And I imagine that all nature works like this, with the single exception of human beings who have been poisoned by language, and that language has inculcated in us the very strong illusion of an unknown future, but that in fact the future is not unknowable if you can decondition yourself from the assumption of spatial concreteness. So the answer to how the pigeon finds its way home is that a portion of the pigeon's mind is already home and never left home. And that we, gazing at this, assume that pigeons, monarch butterflies, so forth, are simpler systems than ourselves. But in fact, our assumption of the unknowability of the future creates a problem here where there is no problem, and that it's only in the domain of language, and perhaps only in the domain of certain languages, that this can become a problem. To put it simply, I assume that if you are a pigeon, we speak here of asking the pigeon, if you had the consciousness of a pigeon, you would not have a diminutive form of human consciousness. You would have a consciousness that we can, obviously, based on this discussion, barely conceive of, because the consciousness of the pigeon is a continual awareness extending from egg to death. And the particular moment in space and time in which an English-speaking person confronts a pigeon is, for the pigeon, not noticeably distinct from all the other serial moments of its life. So the problem is in the way the question is asked, and in the way human beings interpret the data that is deployed in front of them. After all, in the animal world, the future is always rather like the past, because novelty is rather suppressed in the animal world. Most things that happen have happened before and will happen again. So my expectation would simply be that what we're seeing when we confront these kinds of edge phenomenon in biology is the beginning of a set of phenomena which, when correctly interpreted, will bring the idea of quantum mechanical biology out of the realm of charge transfer and intercellular and subcellular activity and into the domain of the whole organism. I'm not sure this is the solution, but it does cause the problem to disappear.
Exactly. It's not the solution, but it causes the question to go away. I wish I could say that Rupert
I
and
thought
I
that's
had,
what solutions were supposed to do.
if Rupert and I had got together last night and tried to predict what you would say, then I would have bet on that. But still, you exceeded my worst expectation. Are you saying, have I got this right, that the entire life history of the pigeon is more or less determined at the outset, including the trip away from the loft and the trip back? So, as a matter of fact,
it never went anywhere.
It never went anywhere.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought I heard.
It's only when you have a three-dimensional grid imposed by language laid over this that there appears to be a problem. In other words, there is some kind of a totality about it, but we section it and deny it, and then we come up with a dilemma.
Well, what about the pigeons that get picked off by sparrowhawks on the way home?
That was predetermined as well.
They doubtless saw that as well.
They were born under Scorpio. What can you say?
Well, I mean, I offer, it's not entirely facetious. The real question I'm raising is, to what degree does language create the assumption of an unknown future? To what degree does it somehow dampen a sense of the future that I imagine is very highly evolved in the absence of language?
I still can't grasp it. Do you mean when the pigeon's released, part of its mind is still at home, its return home is in the future, and in some sense that helps it to get home?
Yes, you and I have talked about this before. You've always said the morphogenetic fields push from behind.
No, I've always said they pull from in front.
Oh, well, so then, yes, so they're attractors. Well, so this is partly that, and partly that the consciousness of the organism is distributed in time in a way that makes it capable of doing miracles from our point of view. But from its own point of view, there's nothing unusual going on here at all.
Well, you wouldn't be at all surprised then if, as a matter of fact, the race was won by the clever pigeon that actually vanished at the point of release and simultaneously appeared back in the loft.
Well, if you're suggesting some kind of virtual tunneling as an amplified quantum mechanical effect, perhaps we have the solution to spontaneous combustion here well in hand, or something like that.
But I still think it's different whether the future is totally determined or if the consciousness of the future includes several alternatives. And in case it contains several alternatives, then sooner or later the pigeon will be presented by a fork in the road and have to decide which way to go. Furthermore, the pigeon, if it had control of all physical levels, would not have to fly. But here we see poor guy is lumbering along, gets tired, stops for food, and so on. We imagine this is at least the fundamental assumption for our discussion, that pigeon flight is subject to our own concept of the world, including the laws of physics and so on, much as we feel they should be extended and want to extend them by studying pigeons and doing these experiments. The idea is to somehow modify our view of the world by engulfing the pigeon view of the world for our greater benefit. So I think there's still missing here some kind of mechanism for the pigeon to follow this line, this stretched rubber band of its own consciousness that occupies an extended region of space and time, to follow it so that its ordinary physical body ends up back where its consciousness is. How does it do it?
Well, an analogy would be, when you run a cartoon or a film backwards, there's a spectacle of wild confusion, but miraculously everything manages to end up in the right place. So what we had, it isn't that there really aren't choices. For a pigeon when it comes into awareness, it comes into all the awareness it will ever have. It's like getting your memories at the moment of birth. Your deathbed memory is handed to you at the moment of birth. So then essentially for the pigeon, it's a kind of play. It knows what's going to happen. It doesn't even know that it knows what's going to happen, because that's the nature of its perception, a complete spectrum of understanding of its entire life. And then it goes through it, and it unfolds as anticipated, although the pigeon doesn't have the concept anticipated. We, looking at it, have that concept. And we alone, I think, are tormented by the anxiety of the unknowable future. And it's an artifact, I maintain, of culture and language. And so it has given us, and we impute it to the rest of nature, but in fact things like monarch butterflies, pigeon homing, and some of these other phenomena are clues to us that imputing our consciousness into nature creates problems like the one we're discussing here. I don't know exactly why you resist this, because I think it's simply a more elegant statement of the rubber band theory.
Well, that means that except for our ignorance caused by the power of language, that we would have the consciousness of a pigeon and therefore see our entire lifetime. So this, according to this view, the baby pigeon check upon pecking out of the shell is like waking from a dream, looking around and realizing that, oh damn, I'm the one that's going to have to race 3 years from now, and they're going to put this other jerk in there with my mate.
Well, but you see, you use language to portray the state of mind of the pigeon. That immediately collapses its four-dimensional vector into 3 dimensions, and then it becomes no longer a pigeon, but a person talking like a pigeon.
Is the pigeon then aware or unaware of its entire history from birth till death?
It's aware, but it's not aware that it's a history. You see, history is
one timeless moment.
One timeless moment. And we could go further with this and say this explains our own curious relationship to the prophetic and the anticipated. Instead of, like the pigeon, having a 95% clear view of the full spectrum of its existence, by opting into language, we have perhaps a 5% view of the future. So we're tormented by messiahs, prophecies. We lean toward astrology and computer modeling, and all of these advanced tools then give us a very weak and wavering map of the future, which we nevertheless pay great credence to and worry a great deal about. I'm suggesting that theoretically, if we could step away from language, and perhaps this is what Zen anchorites and people like that do, isn't this what they teach? That you fall into a timeless realm where it holds no threat, and all things are seen with a kind of great leveling, and anxiety leaves the circuit. So I'm suggesting, one more version of the fall, that from the fourth dimensional world of nature, complete in time, we fell into the limited world of language and an unclear future, and hence great anxiety about that, and hence conundrums like, how do the pigeons find their way home?
Well, this suggests that we should stop talking and writing books and just hum.
I've always felt that. Rather like a pigeon.
Does this imply, is this, as I suspect, a polite way of saying that Rupert's current book and the homing pigeon experiment is a total waste of time, and even if it only costs £10, it's a shame?
Well, that's a wider issue, but you know very well that I think experiment as currently understood is futile, because all experiments, including, I assume, all the experiments in Rupert's book, make the assumption that time is invariant. And I don't believe that time is invariant. So we're now going to, I didn't intend to open this up as a general frontal attack on the epistemic methods of modern science, but in fact, the idea that time is invariant is entirely contradicted by our own experience, and it's merely an assumption science makes in order to do its business.
I believe that we have a case here of multiple personality in action, and now I'm going to undertake to prove it. So we suppose that Rupert had in his book an 8th chapter on an experiment with homeopathic medicine. And this experiment was done, and the outcome of it was that a flower power was discovered which absolutely and instantly cures hay fever. Then you would be interested in the result of the experiment or not?
Sure.
I rest my case.
Well, as a practical matter, I don't think we should confuse our ideologies with our sinuses. No, you see, I would like to redefine science as the study of those phenomena so crude that the time in which they are embedded is without consequence. I would like to redefine science as the study of those phenomena so crude that the time in which they are embedded is without consequence. And I suppose ball bearings rolling down slopes and things like this fall into that category. But the things which interest us, love affairs, the fall of empires, the formation of political movements, these things always happen in different ways. There is no theory for much of what happens in the human world. And I maintain it's because in the human world, the invariance of time forces itself upon us. And so we create categories of human knowledge outside science, like psychology, or that's sort of a fence sitter, but advertising and political theory and this sort of thing. So that addresses the invariant time, or the variable time that we experience, and then we hypothesize a theoretical kind of time that is invariant, and that's where we do all this science that has led us into these incredibly alienating abstractions. This goes back to Newton. Newton said time is pure duration. He visualized time as an absolutely featureless surface. Well, now notice, Ralph, Aristotle's effort to describe nature with perfect mathematical solids has been abandoned long ago, because nowhere do we meet perfect mathematical forms in nature. The only perfect mathematical form that has been retained in modern scientific theory is the utterly unsupported belief that time, no matter at what scale you magnify it, will be found to be utterly featureless. There is absolutely no reason to think this, and considerable evidence to the contrary. The problem is, if we were to ever admit that time is a variable medium, 1,000 years of scientific experiment would be swept away and we would be back to Z. So it's just simply a house of cards, and better left where it stands, I think. But the fact of the matter is, there is no reason to believe that time is invariant. And experience argues the contrary.
No, but the thing is the invariability, I mean, this seems to go a little bit beyond the problem of pigeon homing.
Well, it addresses the problem of experiment as a notion.
But I don't think it actually touches it, you see, because I think what you've been saying, if we take it down to the level of the pigeons again, it does, as you yourself say, it turned out to be an elaborate version of the rubber band theory, the rubber filigree or something like that. Anyway, the rubber band theory would say that they'd be drawn back to the loft, and the experiment of moving the loft and seeing if they can find the moved loft. Let's say they can do that. There's an experiment. It would show us something that goes beyond anything contemporary science would expect. It might or might not fit with your all-time theory.
It does fit.
But nevertheless, here we have an experiment, crude though it is, which would show that the existing scientific models are inadequate. We need something that goes beyond them. We need something that shows how the pigeon can be linked to the home. The rubber band theory does involve a kind of attraction to the home, and in that sense involves a pull in time. So it does raise all these questions, perhaps.
Well, do you have a theory about how this works? I mean, I don't see how morphogenetic fields are particularly helpful here unless we or if they are helpful, then in the boil down, it's the same thing I'm saying.
Yes, I think I wouldn't. If there's a field that includes both the pigeon and its loft, so here's the pigeon, here's its loft. Normally they're together, it's normally the home. You separate them, you can either do it by moving the loft, or you can do it by moving the pigeon. But either way they're separated, they're part of a single system. Because the pigeon's world includes its loft, its home, its mates, all the rest of it. You move them, they're now separated parts of a single system, they're linked by a field. And the pigeon is attracted within this field back towards the home, which functions as the attractor. This is where we in Ralph have this different view of attractors. In dynamics, things are drawn towards attractors. And if the loft is an attractor within the field, then the pigeon is, as it were, pulled back towards the field. It doesn't need an AA roadmap of the whole of Britain. That's irrelevant. It just feels a pull in a particular direction. And so the trouble with the map theory, you see, is it has all this information, the whole of Britain, star rising, all these kind of features of this roadmap. It doesn't need that. You don't need that. You only need if you're trying to work out where you're going to go by some method of rational calculation.
Oh, well, this is the angel theory, that when I come to the fork in the road, a guardian angel appears from behind a tree and tells me which way to go.
Roughly speaking, yes. Or you just feel a pull in a particular direction. You don't even think about it. You just feel that's the way to go, and you're drawn that way. I think that's how the pigeon does it, subjectively. I don't think it necessarily needs to see the whole of its future from egg to grave. I think it feels a pull towards where its home is by this kind of invisible rubber band, which is actually, if you like, a gradient within the field towards an attractor, which is its home. I mean, that's how you could model it mathematically.
Yes.
But you wouldn't need to bring in the whole of the rest of Britain and a roadmap. Now, if you did need a roadmap for the whole of the rest of Britain and all the rest of the world, then we'd have the question, how would it get it? Well, I've got a theory how it could get it, but I think it might tune into the collective memory of all the other pigeons that have ever gone on homing races. All of them see the ground they're flying over. If a pigeon could access the collective pigeon psyche, or take it further, even the collective memory of other species, not just pigeons, if all birds could link up to what all other birds had seen, then they would indeed have a global map of the world. They could gain access to it. But I think that's possibly going further than we need for this rather limited case. It may be more relevant in the case of migrations, where you have birds migrating over thousands of miles, in the case of cuckoos, young cuckoos, migrating to South Africa, independent of their parents that leave in July from England. The young cuckoos leave in August. They've never met their parents because they're cuckoos. And their parents, in any case, push off before the young ones are ready to fly. They go all that way. And I think in that case they must be tuning in at least to a kind of collective cuckoo memory that includes features of the landscape over which they fly. But the rubber band theory wouldn't necessitate even that, you see. It would necessitate maybe some degree of collective memory, but it would essentially have this kind of pull, directional pull.
Well, there still seems to me some kind of problem, either a mathematical or cognitive problem, when the loft is moved, then the dynamical system, which extends essentially over the whole of the planet, wherever this pigeon may be released, and all the way back, has to receive the feeling which direction to go from the guardian angel or whatever. And that directional field all over the planet has changed when the loft was moved. So the question arises, how does the attractor, the loft, extend its field and directional instruction all over the planet? And I don't think that the idea of morphic resonance helps here, because no other pigeon has flown to that particular loft.
No, I'm not talking about morphic resonance, I'm talking about the field itself. Morphic resonance is a memory of how to do it. If you have a magnet, say you have a magnet, a pile of iron filings here, and you have a magnet over here, and you put the magnet there, these iron filings will be drawn towards it, and you'll see lines of force moving towards it. If you then move the magnet over here, you don't have to, there's an immediate adjustment.
The loft itself, simply functions as a magnet, as it were, in another field which is not an electromagnetic field,
that's right,
but is sort of an emotional field.
Yes.
And
the loft's like a magnet, and so you move the loft, it's just like moving a magnet. Automatically, now the iron filings or whatever will go there. That's basically the model I'm suggesting. And
the reason that I can't find my car in the parking garage is because I'm not emotionally attached to it, and I've never been in love with it. I could get an Italian car.
Well, it's a thing about, I mean, in the human realm, it could apply to finding people. And Jill does an experiment, well, she doesn't call it an experiment, in her workshops, where people form pairs. And they can first find each other by humming with their eyes closed and find the person. Then after they've got good at that, you can then find your partner with your eyes closed, so you can't see, just by feeling where they are and heading for them in that direction. And now that's an example of this possible magnetic pull in the human realm. I've tried doing this experiment with our children on the grounds that it ought to be particularly strong and it turned out Merlin was extremely good at finding me. And then I discovered he was peeping. So I'm afraid this experiment, he couldn't quite see the value of totally objective, utterly controlled scientific study. So, I mean, it may be, you see, that the bonds between pigeons and their home are comparable to the bonds between people and other people, and indeed they may be related to the kind of social, that which holds societies together. When we say there's a bond between people, we may mean something more than a mere metaphor. It may be that there is an actual connection between them. And so we have many examples from the human realm. A child falls ill hundreds of miles away, and their mother immediately starts worrying and rings up on the telephone. This may be another manifestation of the same kind of thing. And it may be part of the social bonding. I mean, the motive of the pigeon to go home is social. It's not merely geographical. If it hasn't got mates and so on, it doesn't bother. If you try racing them in the winter and they've got no social motivation, they hang out wherever they can. They join into other people's lofts and so on. And it may well be that the pigeon that spent such a pleasant 10 days here at Hazelwood, like most of us, discovered this is a really nice place to be. And it didn't have a sufficiently strong motivation to get home. So we may be looking here at something that's essentially a social bond, but which, because we're never in exactly the same place as somebody else, two bodies can't exist. We're always separated to some degree, however small, from those we're bonded to. And often, in the case of birds that fly, foraging for food, in the case of migratory birds, in the case of all animals that have to go out, bees that have to forage out from their hives and then come back, there must be some way in which these social bonds extend into a geographical dimension and then become spatial, directional bonds to find the home group. In the case of wolves, there are these cases reported by naturalists of packs of wolves that go out hunting. A wolf may be injured, sometimes they're injured, and then they stay behind in a kind of lair while the whole pack goes hunting. And there's this book by W.J. Long called How Animals Talk, about his tracking of wolves in Canada, in the snow. The pack would go out hunting about 20 miles and went round and then killed an animal quite silently, no baying, they do it quietly. And then from the tracks he found that the wounded wolf had taken the shortest line from where it was to the place where they had this kill and joined the rest of the pack and got a meal. And the track showed that it had gone in a straight line, not followed the scent of where they were. And he showed it couldn't just be sound and it couldn't be smelling because the wind was blowing the wrong way. So this kind of social bond, this kind of linkage may be utterly fundamental, you see, and pigeon homing may be related to the social field in some sense and its extension over the geographical realm.
Well, I'm sensing a kind of convergence here where even Terence could find something to agree with, that there is a sixth sense. It is a field phenomenon, like the quantum field. It's a social field. It's involved with the flocking of birds, the schooling of fish, and with herds of animals and packs of wolves. And you had a question. You started us off. What would this teach us, or what would that mean to us in terms of our future? And it could be that humans are somehow divorced from the significance of this field. So whenever the guardian angel speaks, they always do the opposite or something. And if we wanted to understand the population explosion, the demise of the planet, and all these wars and the manifestation of hatred and the sources of the evil and so on, a candidate for the disharmony in the human species would be its disconnection with this field. And here's where Terence comes in, that somehow it's the implication of language is to submit to it is to lose your connection with the field. So we all have done experiments in not speaking. For example, meditation, for example, dreaming, where the antithesis of language has an opportunity to come forward and to attempt to reconnect us to this field, a harmonizing influence that entrains us, but not for long, especially for people like Americans who watch television for 7 hours a day. There is somehow not enough time away from language.
But notice that most prophetic episodes are dream episodes. I think that supports my point that we've lost connection with a kind of fourth dimensional perception that for the rest of nature is absolutely a given.
Why do you think it's a given in the rest of nature? I mean, I don't still see why you need to have the pigeon knowing the whole of its future.
Well, because you have many, many cases of this kind of thing. Animals that are put in the pound by owners who are moving, and then the owners move 700 miles and the animal escapes from the pound and it doesn't return to the ancestral home, it returns to the new apartment in a different city. The monarch butterflies, the homing pigeons, a whole host of mysterious phenomena become utterly transparent and trivial if you simply hypothesize that for them the future doesn't have this occluded character that it has for us as a result of our acquiescence in the language behavior. It seems to me
it's not just a problem in time, it's a problem in space. You could say that they know that they're going to wind up at the new home and meet the but then still you've got the problem how they know which way to go. And I don't
presumably they see themselves at every point in their life, not just the high or low points.
And a minute in the future,
they're a minute
ahead of where they are, so
yes.
they just go that way.
In the future, they're that way.
In other words, they can always see it from where they are. It's always ahead of them, in the same way that we navigate through space. I mean, if you were a two-dimensional creature, the things that we do navigating in three-dimensional space would be absolutely mysterious and generate all kinds of metaphysical speculation and hypotheses and so forth and so on. But, I mean, why should nature imprison itself within a temporal domain? Clearly, for us, it's an artifact of language. I mean, we talk about future tenses, past tenses. Those aren't descriptive of the future and the past. They create it. That's why I put in the possible exception of perhaps there are human languages where this is not happening, and therefore they are much closer to animal perception. The mysterious, quote-unquote, mysterious behavior of the Australian Aborigines, the Hopi. These peoples, they seem capable of things that to us are like magic, but the magic is all done by knowing what's going to happen. So if they simply imbibe that animal understanding, then to them it's trivial. That seems to me the most elegant explanation. And it doesn't require new undetected fields or any of these other somewhat cobbled together mechanisms. Just
another dimension.
Well, we know it's there. There's no debate about that. Here, an example, and to carry that forward, I've always felt that the role of shamans in Aboriginal society, especially the ones that were using psychoactive plants, that all the magic that they do suddenly becomes not so mysterious if you simply assume that by perturbing the ordinary brain states and ordinary language states, they then let in this hyperdimensional understanding. Because look at what shamans do really. They predict weather, that's classical. That demands a knowledge of the future. They tell the tribe where the game has gone, also requiring a knowledge of the future. And they rarely lose a patient. That means they know who's going to make it and who isn't, and they refuse all cases perceived to be fatal. So here are 3 examples of shamanic magic, all easily explained by the simple assumption that they can perceive to some degree the future, which is occluded to ordinary people locked in ordinary language and brain states. QED.
Do the pigeons do a ritual then to get in touch with it?
No, animals are in this place to begin with. You see, look at the shaman, to push this point again. What is the shaman's strategy for attaining his special knowledge? He becomes like an animal. He is master of animals. He dresses in skins. He growls.
He talks to pigeons.
He talks to the animals. He perturbs his brain state with ordeals or drugs or something like this. But the very close association of the shaman to the animal mind suggests that that's the clue to entering this atemporal or 4D perceptual sphere.
And as Joe mentioned at the beginning, in the Christian tradition, the principle, symbol of the Holy Spirit, which is that which gives inspired prophecy, shamanic-type gifts of healing, all the gifts of the Spirit, including speaking in tongues, prophecy, healing, and so forth, discernments and intuitions of various kinds, are symbolized by the pigeon. So there's some curious way in which the dove, well known at the biblical times for its homing powers. The Egyptians had a homing pigeon service in ancient Egypt. So the choice of the pigeon was not just plucked out of nowhere. Noah's Ark was the first biblical story of the pigeon, where the pigeon is sent off and comes back with the homes with an olive twig. So right from the beginning, the pigeon is seen as a messenger that can find out things in distant places and come home and bring back the information. So you could say that central to the whole Western tradition, this shamanic thing of becoming like an animal, in this case, somehow entering the mind of a pigeon, or in some way assimilating to the state of a pigeon, is the basis of the gift of knowledge, prophecy, and spiritual power.
It sounds right to me.
So should we now...
Yes, I think so.
Let us now open this up, and then we can...
Essentially, yes. I mean, I think it might take some time, but I think as a strategy for expanded awareness, that's how it would present itself experientially. Trappist monasteries do this. All Aboriginal peoples sequester the young men and women, often by themselves, for a period of silence. Somehow language is a strategy for holding at bay a much more complex world, that if we can by any means remove the language forming capacity, even...
What's the Trialogue then? The Trialogue is the complete contradiction of everything you're saying. You're using the language to...
Well, who was it said, I contradict myself? I contradict myself. The obsession with intellectual closure is inappropriate to talking monkeys, because nowhere is it writ large that talking monkeys should be able to achieve a complete understanding of reality. I think part of what we have to do is live with unsolved mysteries that are in principle insoluble. They're not simply unsolved problems. They're in principle mysterious. All would agree that the highest understanding resides in silence, but it's the death of conversation, hardly to speak of weekend workshops.
So if language is so disadvantageous, and the principle of the survival of the fittest, why do you think it developed?
Well, maybe it's a maladaptive trait. Many maladaptive traits develop. I'm not willing to say that. I think it has, for us, it's a substitute for other forms of cohesion, like pheromones, which are a kind of language that knit together insect societies. Originally, we were possibly fairly unsocial creatures. In other words, human beings may have paired and reared their children in secret. We've created societies of billions of people, and the linkage is language, and it's an unsteady linkage, as we can see. I mean, I don't have an answer for why language evolved.
Presumably we were pack animals like wolves or horses and tribal cultures.
Pack animals are the animals that produce complex signaling systems to coordinate themselves in space with barks and yips and yells. They coordinate hunting activity and this sort of thing. It may be that relatively benign adaptation carried further becomes something else. What we do, I think, that no other animal does, is we carry out symbolic activity. And it's this symbolic activity that has closed us off from the reality of what lies outside the symbol system.
Can you give an example of that?
Symbolic activity? Everything we do. I mean, for instance, think of a child lying in a crib with an open window and a hummingbird comes through the room. Well, this is like a miracle. It's all light and iridescence and whirring sound, and the child is sucked into the presence of a miracle. And then its nurse or its mother comes into the room and says, "It's a bird, baby, bird." Suddenly the miracle is collapsed into a lexeme, and by the time you are 5 years old, the entirety of reality has been very carefully mosaicked over with words. And to burst through that to whatever reality lies beyond is the task of a mystic or a shaman, and it's extraordinarily difficult. That's what I mean by trading in the world for symbolic signification. Well, I question whether we actually think in words or to what degree we do. What you notice when you experiment with these shamanic tools, such as psychoactive plants, is that as the intoxications deepen, thought becomes vision, and one thinks in images. And I imagine that this is the Aboriginal thought style, and we must have thought in images for a long time before we downloaded into words. To the degree that people think in images, I think they are a different sort of person than the word-oriented person. I think thinking in words may be an artifact of writing and print, and may have been most intensified in the last 1,000 years. I mean, sensory ratios are incredibly subject to cultural modification. As an example of what I mean by that, St. Augustine, to prove his piety, they would open a book of scripture in front of him, and without making a sound, he would examine it for a few minutes, and then they would close the book and question him, and he was able to discuss what was written there on the page. He was the only man in Europe, in other words, who could read silently, and it was thought a miracle. Well, we all read silently and think nothing of it. So I think the mind is very malleable and the imprint of culture very deep. You know, McLuhan suggested that the concept of the citizen, the concept of the industrial assembly line, were both artifacts of print and would have been incomprehensible in a manuscript culture. This is an area where we are very naive. How our languages affect our view of the world. As I hear what you're saying the glory of our humanness is our free will. But in fact, you're right. The decisions that we make form us as individuals, not as a species. And so in an animal situation, the individual animal, I think, that's not what is of interest there. We differentiate ourselves from each other by the choices that we make, and that requires this unknowable future dimension.
You just poo-pooed it, so we don't need it. It's an illusion.
Well, I didn't poo-poo it. I said animals don't have it. Clearly, we are of a different order. I'm not a pro-animal, anti-human sort. I mean, I think the human world is definitely the most interesting world, but I think maybe you've put your finger on it, that without this illusion of an unknowable future, we would not differentiate as individuals. So it's a happy flaw, o felix culpa, right?
And some people have always been afraid of prophecy. That you have the moral dilemma.
Well, it raises real questions about free will, that's for sure. I mean, one can suppose it raises real questions. I mean, if a prophecy comes true, does that mean then that in principle all of the future is determined? You see, we have to avoid determinism here, because a true determinism means thinking is pointless. Because in a rigid determinism, you think what you think because you couldn't think anything else. So the concept of truth is utterly without meaning in a rigid determinism. So perhaps in the pursuit of truth, the unknown future is a necessity. and it allows our individuation from each other, and that is the particular hallmark of our species, is that we are a population of individuals, not a population that is defined genetically.
Well, this is the challenge, isn't it? Because we have to...
These language structures are very provisional. Every culture assumes that it is building an edifice of eternal truth. But every culture has all other cultures as examples before it of parochiality, provincialism, and limited understanding. Why we then should assume that our culture is any more provisional than any other is simply a matter of hubris and historical momentum. I don't think the meaning of human existence lies in culture. It lies in the individual. And to access that meaning, a certain amount of deconditioning, i.e. alienation, has to take place from a culture. If you're just a cheerful representative of your culture, you're a kind of mindless bore, whether you represent Japanese culture, Indonesian culture, or whatever. We require distance between ourselves and the object of our contemplation in order to define ourselves.
And I think, to go on with this, that Terence earlier pointed out, the animal state is pre-language, but the state advocated by mystics and all great religions is to go beyond language. It's not none of the great religious or spiritual traditions say human culture is the end, is where it's at. All of them point beyond it, and all of them point to states of contemplation, mystical insight, prayer, intuition, which go beyond the limitations of language. So I didn't take what Terence was saying to be the denigration of all human culture or language, but pointing out its limitations, which are agreed on by the greatest traditions we have. Well, I think these, in a sense, all these animals can be our teachers, you see. And I think that the part of my interest in the homing pigeons, and indeed the other experiments that I've been thinking about lately, is to help to see us as much more to the natural world, and certainly much more to the animal world, than current models allow. The current models of biology, of institutional biology, say all animals and plants are pure machines, totally explainable in terms of A-level physics. They don't even take quantum physics into it. And if you do, then you get weird phenomena like non-locality, which would mean pigeon homing might not be such a mystery. But so the attempt to reduce all animals and the whole of nature has been going on for a long time, and it's part of the triumphalist culture we have. Our culture is based on the agenda of conquering nature. We can conquer the whole of nature, and now we've told every other culture in the world that's where it's at. Development programs, logging operations, and so on. So the ecological crisis is a result of working out this particular way of thinking about nature and other species. I think that recovering a sense of... I don't think that anybody here is saying we've got to say animals are better than us and denigrate the whole human race, but to recognise that there are astonishing powers in the animal and the other realms of nature, which we've just simply been blind to. We're blind to them if we think in terms of institutional science. People who actually know animals well, people who train horses, who keep dogs and cats, and who actually observe their behaviour, know full well that they have very often uncanny or seemingly uncanny powers of knowing which go beyond what we would expect on the basis of textbook biology. So I think these are ways of learning more about the world in which we live and more about the biological context of our lives. And when we come to dolphins, then indeed this is... If we take big brains to be the criterion of our superiority to the rest of the animal kingdom, then we have to face the fact that whales and several other animals have bigger brains than us. And what are they doing with all that cerebral capacity? They're certainly not building media empires and constructing television programs and so on. So I think that this interest in dolphins and whales as having a different kind of consciousness, and possibly a more harmonious and telepathic consciousness, is another way in which people are trying to learn from the animal kingdom about I mean, it creates a kind of humility in ourselves, doesn't it, to realise that here are these astonishing social forms based on kinds of consciousness quite different from our own, and possibly more advanced in certain ways. And all we regard them, at least all Japanese fishermen regard the dolphins as nuisances for getting in the way of their drift nets. And the whales are simply a resource to be exploited, and Norwegians want to resume it because it's good for it will save job losses in northern Norway, that kind of thing. There's a clash of value systems here, and I think the whole of our modern civilization is in crisis because of this clash of value systems. So what's really going on in the rest of nature. Rediscovering what's happening is very important, and it does have wider consequences for our future as a species and a civilization. These are not mere questions of idle curiosity.
Well, I find this a little dissatisfying somehow to stop on this point. We didn't resolve what I think is the basic question about the homing pigeon, especially in connection with its significance for ourselves, because here we have a couple of divergent views. Even if we concede that the loft radiates a field, that the homing pigeon follows this field by a process of clairvoyance, in which it has a precognition of its position a moment hence and just goes in that direction. There's still, I think, the fundamental question has to do with the utter determinism of this, and whether the homing pigeon sees a variety of future positions and has to test them out by some process to determine which one is the most connected to the loved one or to the home, or whether there is only one vision and it just follows it. That's the fundamental question, because thinking of our species as the homing pigeon, and we're hoping to get home, if the future is totally determined, probably the likeliest outcome is the demise of the entire species, if not the biosphere itself. And of course that's no trouble for Terence, having accepted that. But most people, I think, are seeing a variety of possible outcomes and seeking a way to ennoble their own life by philosophical position of empowerment, in which what you do, which choice you make, by what criteria you prioritize the possible futures, would actually lead in one direction instead of the other one. Thus, in the context of free will for the homing trajectory of the entire species, life obtains a moral meaning. If it matters what we do, that's one thing. If it doesn't matter what we do, that's another. Therefore, it sort of matters whether it matters or not, if you see what I mean.
I think Bell's theorem in quantum theory says there's this principle that if things have been part of the same system and they're separated, they retain an instantaneous correlation, even if they're miles apart, even if they're going apart at the speed of light. Now, this is part of quantum theory, and it's totally unlike anything in conventional physics. And so the pigeon is separated from its home or from its loved ones, and if Bell's theorem applies at the larger scale, then you could say they're part of the same system. They retain a non-local or non-separable connection. And this could be the basis of the rubber band or the homing system or whatever. You could say that. The trouble is that physicists don't know whether Bell's theorem applies in the larger scale or not. Most of them want an easy life, and so they say, oh, well, Bell's theorem's fine if you're dealing with these microscopic systems. It doesn't seem to have any effects anywhere else. We'll just regard it as a peculiar feature of microscopic physics. It could be that there are other physicists, including Ralph's friend Nick Herbert, who's spent years puzzling and wrestling with the consequences of Bell's theorem, thinking it must or may have implications at the larger scale realm. And you see, homing pigeons may indeed, I think, come to be seen as a large-scale manifestation of the same principle. I mean, I myself think that's quite a likely possibility. But Ralph knows Nick better and has talked about these things more. So what do you think about that now?
Well, what I think is that quantum mechanics applies to a different realm, and it provides us with metaphors, and Bell's theorem is a stimulating metaphor to understand this phenomenon of bonding. But to take this model too seriously seems to me ridiculous.
Well, this is the thing that they've been trained to do. And if you think about it, you see, under normal conditions, no bird or animal would ever do this. In a homing experiment, the pigeon is captured by the owner grabbing it, putting it inside a basket, and it's transported on a train or a lorry for hundreds of miles. Well, in nature, that doesn't happen to animals very much. If they go away from home, they usually go under their own steam. And the normal circumstances is the pigeons range out from Trafalgar Square or wherever they live, and they forage. In Trafalgar Square, they don't have to go far usually because all these tourists feed them there. But normally, pigeons live on buildings or on rocks. The original habitat of the homing pigeon it's a rock pigeon. It lives on rocks, on cliffs. That's why they like buildings in London, because they like cliffs. And they go out and forage, and they find their way home. That's the biological basis, and they've somehow got this to a very high degree, and they've been selected over many generations. But they have all the normal bird life as well.
It kind of a bit like that as well, isn't it? It kind of operates in slightly odd, strange circumstances.
And these pigeons have also been selected very strongly over many generations. Pigeons that aren't very good at homing don't make it back from races, and they don't get bred from in the next generation. So there's been tremendously strong selection. Anyway, yes, I think that how this relates to human affinities and so on comes back to this question of the social bonding being the underlying basis for all these forms of behaviour, and what forms of affinity or bonding are involved. We don't know much.
Love, you could say, love at various levels, you can think of love and...
Yes, but that's another subject. I think maybe it isn't, but
it's a bond which draws two unlikely people together. I remember it's a love which takes the pigeon back to its children, eggs and nests.
Well, some people would find that an unflattering comparison, because we like to think human love's different, but I think that would be...
But we'll call it homing from now on.